Hello again, guys. Welcome to Lesson 7. So today we're going to go ahead and start Lesson 7, but you should have already done the test from Lessons 1 through 6. You got that in the email that I sent to you that has the links to these two lessons also. If you have not taken the test, go ahead and go back and take it now and then come back to the video. The reason is because none of what we learned today in this lesson is going to be on the test. And so while you could listen to it beforehand, it may just confuse you more. So I would recommend going and taking the test first, then coming back and looking at this lesson. So because the test is part of today's lesson, it'll just be a short lesson, probably 45 minutes or an hour maybe. And then the rest of the time you can just spend on the test and making sure you do your very best on that. So let's go ahead and begin. We have this speech, which is one of my absolute favorites of all time. It's by a woman named Sojourner Truth. She is an African-American woman who lived, as you can see, back in the 1850s, of course. So this was back when it was not only a very tough time for African-Americans, but it was a pretty tough time to be a woman, too. Women didn't have the right to vote yet. Women didn't really have any rights at all. They couldn't own property for the most part, and they definitely were not treated as equals. Now, as a Black woman, she was definitely in a place where she did not have the same kind of privileges that a lot of white women had. So here she's talking mostly about her as a woman and how she has a right as a woman and as a human being, really, to have the same rights as a man. And certainly, if not as a man, at least as a white woman. And so this is something that's very interesting. We're going to read through it together. There's a lot of religious undertones to it, so keep that in mind as we're reading it. So I'm going to try to explain those as we go, and we'll also be defining some of the words as well as we go. And then there are some questions on the next page, which will probably be your only homework for this week, because again, you have quite a bit to do with the test. All right, so here is, again, and this is a speech, by the way, happened in 1851. So here she says, "Well, children," and again, this is sort of a, back in this time, the African-American type of speech. So this is just transcribed directly. So she's not actually speaking to her children. She's talking to people in general. So she says, "Where there's so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. I think that twixt the Negroes of the South and the women of the North all talking about rights, the white men will be in a fix pretty soon." But what's all this here talking about? Okay, so let's stop here for a second and define some of these words. So we have, first of all, her talking, and she says there's so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. So the racket here that she's talking about is the noise, basically. So she's saying there's so much noise happening here, there's so much discussion, essentially, that's going on, that there must be something out of kilter. So out of kilter, as you can probably guess from the context, means there's something out of the ordinary. There's something basically wrong here, and she's going to try to point that out to us. And then the twixt she's talking about is short for betwixt, which is where we get the word between, of course. So she's saying between the people of the South and the women of the North, all talking about rights. And then she's saying everyone, regardless if it's in the South or the North, are all talking about rights right now, civil rights, basically. And she's saying that white men will be in a fix pretty soon. Now, I love what she says here. So this fix that she's talking about here is essentially they'll be in trouble, basically. So many people are talking about rights that eventually the white men are going to be in trouble. Now, why does she point out that it's the white men who are going to be in trouble? Well, the white men are the ones with all the power, right, in this time period. And so she's saying because so many people are talking about this, eventually the white men, who are the ones with the power, the ones who can change things, are going to have to change something. Okay. So here, when she says that man over there, she's talking about kind of the man, the one who is saying that women anywhere should not have the same rights as men, and that Black women especially should not have any rights at all. And so she's saying that man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. So she is talking about like the Southern gentleman, basically. So that Southern gentleman is helping the dainty, white women basically into their carriages and lifting them over mud and doing everything that they can to make sure that they have the most comfortable place. Then she says, nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me the best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I could have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get it, and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children, and see them most all sold off to slavery. And when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? So she's saying here, all these white women who are treated basically like delicate flowers, who can't do anything for themselves, who have to be kind of coddled and protected by the white man who is going to do that. She's saying, look at me. She's like, I'm a woman, but she is a strong woman. She's talking about how she has plowed and planted, and no man, she says, no man could head me. In this case, she means no man could have gotten ahead of her in any way. She has worked as much as a man and eaten as much as a man when she could get it, and bear the lash as well. This just breaks my heart because, again, this is the time of slavery. And so she's talking about being beaten, essentially, by her masters. And then she says that all of her children, or most all of her children, have been sold off into slavery. And she's saying that in those moments when she felt the mother's grief, she was a woman just as much as the women that they're helping into carriages. Then she says, then they talk about this thing in the head. What's this they call it? Intellect, somebody whispers. So somebody from the crowd told her intellect is what they call it. And again, she's talking about the person who spoke before her, the man who kind of put down the black women and put down the women in general. She's saying, that's it, honey. What's that got to do with women's rights or Negroes' rights? If my cup won't hold but a pint, and yours holds a quart, wouldn't you be mean not to let me have my little half measureful? Okay, so she's talking about intelligence. Now, the intellect, basically. So there was this common misconception back then that the black people did not have the intellect of the white people, which of course is ridiculous and untrue, but we're looking at it from their perspective and of course their faulty perspective. And so she's saying, of course, if let's say she isn't as smart, she doesn't have as much intellect as the people around her. She's saying that has nothing to do with rights, with women's rights or Negroes' rights or anything. She's saying that has to do with just me getting my share. So she's saying it doesn't matter if I have as much intellect as the person next to me. It really doesn't matter at all. If I have a pint, if you will, of intelligence, if you will, and you have a quart, then shouldn't I have my little pint and you can have your quart and you don't have to worry about giving me any more than that? So she's essentially talking about how she is not being greedy. She's not demanding, to get extra or anything like that. All she's asking for is basic human rights because she is human. And this is not something that people were understanding at the time, which is something terrible to think back on, that this was a time in history when we treated humans as non-humans, if you will, that they didn't deserve as much because people thought they were smart or not as smart or whatever that might be. It's just a ridiculous notion. Then she says, then that little man in black there, she's talking about the preacher. So there was a preacher, essentially, and the little man in black because they wore black robes. And probably a white man, although we don't know. So she's saying that little man in black there, he says women can't have as much rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman. So Jesus Christ wasn't a woman. So historically, Jesus in the century was a Middle Eastern man, and he was, of course, not a woman. And so some people use that as an argument. Well, Jesus wasn't a woman, so therefore we shouldn't give him or you any rights either. Now, then she says something that just shuts everyone down. She says, where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man had nothing to do with him. Now, what does she mean by this? Now, in biblical mythology, Jesus came from a virgin, a person who had never been with a man. And this woman, Mary, gave birth to Jesus, and it was considered a miracle. Joseph, her husband, actually had nothing to do with it. It was Mary alone who bore the child. So she's saying Jesus, who came from a woman, had nothing to do with man. Yes, he was a man, but he came from a woman and he came from God. There's nothing else that will tie him to having more rights because he is a man. So then she says, if the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And now they's asking me to do it again. The men better let him. And then she ends by saying, obliged to you for hearing me, and now old Sojourner ain't got nothing more to say. So she's basically saying here, just kind of dropping the mic if you want to think of it like that, and she's saying that I deserve rights simply because I'm human. I have been through everything that a man has been through. I have been through everything that a white woman has been through and more. And who are you essentially to deny me my rights, essentially? So I wish I could have been here for this speech. I feel like I would have stood up and cheered for her. And after this happened, she became a very famous speaker, actually, and she was well known for traveling around in the area. However, unfortunately, things did not change for another 15 years or so after her death. And so what she did definitely paved the way for civil rights activists coming after her, but she alone, unfortunately, did not see the fruit of her labors. Kind of like Susan B. Anthony, who we read a couple weeks ago. She was great, and she had a lot of say, but she didn't necessarily see changes in her lifetime, which is rather sad. Okay, so here are some questions, which let's do a couple of them, and then then I'll have you do the rest for homework. So what does Truth, Sojourner Truth is her name, remember, say about intellect in paragraph 3, and then do you agree with her? So this is a text-dependent question. So this is text-dependent and open-ended because it talks about it in the text, and also it's asking you an open-ended question. And then here's my rationale. Here's what I think, at least, and you can write your own answer here of what you think. So here she talks about how intellect may vary depending on the person. Oops. Intellect may vary depending on the person, but one's intellect shouldn't dictate their lack of rights. So she, as we know, we looking on this from a 21st century perspective, know that she was just as intelligent, if not more intelligent, than these white men who are ruling the country. But she's being very humble here and saying, assume that I am not as intelligent as you. That's fine. Go ahead and assume that. She's like, but that should not make me less of a candidate to have human rights than the person next to me. Then we have, what moments do you find most compelling in advancing the speaker's argument? Explain what makes them compelling. And again, you guys can answer these together. To me, I think the point she makes about Jesus and the people who argue that, oh, well, Jesus was a man, therefore men should have more rights because God chose him. But no, she says Jesus came from a woman and from God, and that man had nothing to do with him. And so that's something that is very compelling to me. That's something that promotes her argument, I think, better than anything else. So she is excellent at expressing herself, a lot like Susan B. Anthony. Of course, the way that they do it is very different. If you were to put them side by side, I would say that Susan B. Anthony, I'll just put them side by side here for sake of comparison. So Susan B. Anthony and Truce. Oh, hold on. Let me plug in my computer before it dies on me. There we go. So Susan B. Anthony used, if you remember, the Constitution to prove that she had just as much right as any man. Now, Truth uses something a little bit different. She uses an emotional appeal. So how does she do that? Well, she uses the example of her loss as a mother. So the fact that she lost her children, almost all of her children. She also uses her work ethic and also her intelligence. And then she uses religious reasoning to kind of play off of people's feelings about religion. Because most people at the time were Christian. They would have believed in Jesus. And so her using that to support her argument was very good. Now, if you think about the way that Anthony argued versus the way Truth argued, they argued very much for their own strengths, and they argued very much for their own audiences. For example, Anthony was writing in a written format, like an essay format, basically. And Truth was arguing in a speech. So she was giving a speech. Now, of course, that's going to be very different. So an essay is definitely going to be more formal, whereas a speech is going to be much more, I guess emotional is a way to put it. It's definitely going to be more moving. An essay is going to be more of a structured argument, and a speech is more to get a reaction from people. So definitely different forms, but they're both essentially arguing for the same thing. They're arguing for women's rights. Now, Truth has more of a kind of focus on Black American rights, whereas Anthony was focusing mostly on women's right to vote. But they're both on the same side. I'm not sure if they met in real life, but I would imagine if they had, they would have been, if not friends, they at least definitely would have agreed on the same thing. Because if you remember at the end of Susan B. Anthony's speech, she did make the statement that this is the same reason why Black African Americans should have the right to vote as well. The same reasons that I'm giving here, that all men are created equal, and that that alone makes us able to vote or have rights. And Truth is doing essentially the same thing, that we're all equal under God's eyes, therefore we should all have the same rights, essentially. So an exciting time in history, and also something that definitely shaped the world we are in today. For better or worse, this unfortunate time of history where we denied people rights is a part of American history and has shaped us today. And the fact is, if we don't learn from these people and from others, then we really can't move forward in any way. So for homework, go ahead and finish filling out this chart. Not too many questions. If you want to print this out and handwrite it, or if you want to write this on another piece of paper, you can do that as well. Whatever you choose to do is completely fine. All right, let's go ahead and do a little bit of fun exercises now. So first of all, we have cacophony. Now it sounds like cough, and so that's the link here. Cacophony just means like harsh sounds. So they have a smoking lounge and a cacophony of coughing. So a cacophony isn't noise alone, it's disturbing noise, such as when people shout all at once. So Jean thinks that all rock music is a cacophony to be avoided whenever possible, and an unpleasant cacophony of sound was produced as the orchestra tuned their instruments, but once they began to play together, the sounds became euphonious. And incidentally, the opposite of cacophony is euphony. Now, as I think we learned this, I'm pretty certain. So, eu, the prefix, means good, and then phone means sound. So euphony is good sound, whereas cacophony, caco, bad, and phone, sound. So it's a bad sound. So two different words here. Other words that have the phon in it, of course, phonetics. Also, we have telephone, as you can imagine. Now, incidentally, just as another side note, the reason why phone means sound at all actually comes from the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians, whoops, spelled that wrong. Phoenicians were the people who we essentially get our language from. So the Phoenicians came from ancient times. Last lesson we learned a little bit about the history of the English language. The Phoenicians didn't give us very many words, but what they did give us was a lot of our letters. So they gave us the way that we write our alphabet, essentially. And so that's why we have phonetics. Of course, phonics or phonetics are the way that words sound when you say them out loud. That's why cough isn't pronounced kaug, or whatever, however you would say it. It's pronounced cough because of the phonics of it, the pronunciation. So the Phoenicians gave us our system of writing, our system of phonics. Then we have expunge. Expunge means to remove, to delete, or to erase. And you can think of a link as sponge. So a sponge, expunging a spill. So the sponge is sliding across the counter and getting rid of or deleting, erasing the spill there. So the judge ordered the clerk to expunge the lawyer's statement from the record. So to remove it. So expunge, sponge, remove it away. The wet and muddy footprints were expunged with soap and water. Okay, then we have the teacher told Justin expunging the low grades from his record was not something she was willing to do. So maybe it would be nice to have your teacher expunge a low grade, but they won't always do that. Okay, then we have trenchant. So trenchant means cutting, incisive, having a sharp point, caustic, sarcastic. So a trenchant ant, you can think of that. That's kind of a stretch, but I see sort of where they're coming from. A trenchant mouth is characteristic of the famous Madagascar trenchant ant. So trenchant has the idea of being very harsh or severe. So, for example, you can think of it as incisive, and I believe we've had incisive before. It comes from cis, which means cutting. That's where we get the word incisor. Our tooth, incisor, is our sharpest tooth in our mouth. It's the one that is our cutting tooth, if you will. So this word incisive is the same meaning. Then it says Roger's trenchant remarks at the budget meeting could be explained by the fact that he knew precisely where the financial problems lay. The music teacher made numerous trenchant comments about the band's performance. Clearly, she thought the band stunk. And then Julie had a trenchant tongue and was always putting her friends down behind their backs. So this link here also takes us to caustic. Now, caustic is literally meaning acidic. So someone who's caustic, it's like the things that they say are like acid, they burn you. This is also where we get the word acrid, if you want to think of it like that. Now, acrid means harsh or severe. This is also where we get the word acrimonious. Acrimonious means literally dripping with acid. So it's like, again, harsh, severe, kind of, mean-spirited or cutting. Someone who's acrimonious would not be a pleasant person to be around. All right, then we have cerebral. You can link it with cereal. So of or relating to the brain, an intellectual person. So eat your cereal so you'll grow up to be a cerebral like your father. Your cerebrum is the back part of your head, your cortex there. So cerebral for a football player, the wily Kansas quarterback rarely called a play that wasn't well planned and thought out. So he was very smart. He was cerebral. Dr. Clark was too cerebral to be a Boy Scout leader. Instead of saying, pitch your tents over by the cliff, he would confuse everyone with his big words and say, construct the canvas shelters in the proximity of the promontory. So cerebral is the head, essentially, or the intellect. It can refer to the brain just in general or to intelligence. Incongruous. Think of incongruous. Not appropriate, unsuited in the surroundings, not fitting. So you can probably look at the structure of it and get the definition. So think of in, which means not, con, which means with, and gru is essentially basically meaning to go, I guess. It sort of means to go or to travel. So it does not go with something. It does not match it. So the new Alaskan senator's presence in Congress was incongruous. In other words, it just didn't fit. Ed appeared incongruous wearing his tuxedo on an old-fashioned hayride. And then the incongruity with Joseph's chosen career was that he had a PhD in chemistry, but he preferred to work as a mullet fisherman. Incongruously, Diane spent several days a week at the library, even though she professed that she didn't like to read. Okay. I think this is the last one. Bulwark. So bulwark, you can think of it like that. It's a defensive wall, something serving as a principal defense. Bull's work, building a bulwark. Now, this is similar to the word stalwart, but they're two different words. Stalwart. Actually, they are a little bit similar, actually. So stalwart just means basically steady or like a foundation of something. So you can say Susan B. Anthony was a stalwart of the women's rights movement. And that would mean she was like one of the foundations. She was the one who was the most steady all along the way. So Quebec City is the only city in North America with a bulwark built entirely around it. The budget for national defense is an economic burden for all taxpayers, but we must never forget our armed services are the bulwark of defense for the nation. And then our mother was a bulwark against bad times. No matter how bad things became, she always wore a smile and always had a cheerful word. Okay, all right, let's move on to, I guess there's one more. Connoisseur, think of king of sewer. So an expert, particularly in matters of art and taste. So the king of the sewer is a connoisseur of garbage. So you can be a connoisseur of food and drink or music. Actually, really anything that would be considered like a form of art or pleasure, I guess you could be a connoisseur of. So here they have three examples. So my uncle is a connoisseur of fine wine. Art dealer Jorge Guizar is a connoisseur of Mexican art of the 19th century. When it comes to coins, Jerry proclaimed he was a connoisseur because he had collected them all his life. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the lessons. We're not going to have too much today, and I probably won't give you any homework. We'll probably finish this all during the lesson, so you can fill this out as we're going so that you won't have to do this later. So the first one we have is dis, die, and diff, which means not, apart, or away. So it was important in Roman times to start a journey or begin a new venture on a lucky day. One way to find out whether a day was favorable was to consult the stars. If the stars were not in a favorable position, the outcome of any undertaking began on that day was certain to be a disaster. So it literally was not in the stars. So anytime you say something is a disaster, you're meaning essentially, literally, that the stars did not align and you probably should have done it on that day. So the first one we have is diffident. Diffident comes from to trust away. So diffident person is very shy. They do not have faith in oneself. They're timid, just reserved. So the foreign student felt diffident about her accent. So someone who's diffident is just someone who is very reserved and shy. Usually it can refer to someone who is a little bit demure, I guess would be a synonym. I'm not sure if you guys know that word. Diffuse means to pour away, so to spread out or disperse, not concentrated. The photographer diffused the light to get his desired effect. You can also diffuse a situation, meaning you kind of help it to not be so tense. You can also diffuse a bomb, which means to, basically keep it from exploding or concentrating all in one place. Or you can diffuse liquid, by seeping it through a colander. Disarray means a state of disorder or confusion, disorderly dress. So following the death of their leader, the political group fell into disarray. And then we have disperse, which means literally to purse away. Now, this is not talking about a purse like we would think of that your mom carries around. It's more, it means to allocate. So to take away from a purse. So to pay out as from a fund. So if you allocate funds to someone, you are dispersing it. So the president of the society dispersed the scholarship funds. Disconcert means not to bring into agreement or to not bring into agreement, so to upset or to frustrate. So the speaker was disconcerted by the noise in the balcony. So disconcert and discomfit are very close synonyms, which we'll talk about also in this. So disconcert is something that you've probably felt. Let's say you were about to go give a speech in class, or you had a presentation or something, and all of a sudden, your friend made a joke that you just couldn't stop laughing at. Then you go up to speak. You were probably feeling a little bit disconcerted. You were probably just thrown off guard. You didn't really know kind of how you were going to get through it. That's what that means. Disconsolate literally means not able to be consoled, hopelessly sad. Now, soul here means comforted. That's where actually we get the sun. So the word, or the prefix rather, soul, S-O-L-E, means the sun. And originally, the sun was a source of comfort, if you will. So here, disconsolable or disconsolate is you cannot be consoled. So you're just sad and you can't be comforted no matter how much someone else tries to help you. So the team member responsible for losing the relay was disconsolate, meaning nothing anyone said could make them feel better. Then we have discordant, which is hearts apart, not in accord or disagreeable to the ear. So one discordant voice can ruin a choir. Discordant is almost always to do with music or sound of some kind. So, her voice was discordant in the choir or something like that. It means it doesn't go together. A disparity is a difference or an unlikeness. In spite of the size disparity in their ages, they got along well. So disparity doesn't necessarily just have to be ages, but a lot of times it is. For example, there can be disparity in age, in pay, in rank, in income. There's a lot of different ways that something can be disparate. Okay, disproportionate, not proportionate, out of proportion in size, shape, or amount. So his salary was disproportionate to the amount of work that he did. Or you can say that her head was disproportionate to the size of her body or something like that. So it just means it's not quite proportionate. It's not the proper proportions. Dissect literally means to cut apart. So to cut apart, especially for an anatomical study. So our class dissected frogs yesterday. Disseminate means to scatter, to spread abroad as if sowing seed. So the publication disseminated information about endangered species. This would be a synonym of, if you look back up here, be a synonym of diffuse in a similar way. Diffuse generally means to keep something bad from happening or to spread out something that would have been bad if it were concentrated, whereas disseminate just means to scatter. Like you would disseminate information, or you could disseminate seeds in a field. Dissent means, we've had actually this word before. I don't know if you guys remember from a couple weeks ago. To differ in opinion or feeling, to withhold approval. If too many members dissent, the motion will not pass. And dissident is just the adjective form. The noun form. It's a person who is a dissenter. Dissuade means to turn a person away or to try to discourage them using persuasion. So finally, they dissuaded him from giving up his job. So they persuaded him away of doing something. They dissuade. Diverse, unlike as diverse options. So to turn away from other things. So the committee listened to all the diverse views. We also have discomfited, discord, discourse, discredit, discrepancy, discursive, dismantle, blah, blah, blah. The only one I'll probably plant on here for a second is discursive. Now, hopefully you guys will know the meaning of this. Dis, again, means not. Cur, if you remember, means run. So discursive means literally to run in, or it actually means basically to run apart. And in this case, it has to do with speaking. So someone who is discursive is off topic of their conversation. So someone who's discursive gets off on a lot of rabbit trails, and they're always talking, and you're not really sure what point they're trying to make, but they're talking anyway. That would be someone who is discursive. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the exercises here. So here we have number 1. So Kathy woke up, looked at the time, and sped out the door, her hair and clothes in, and they were in a state of essentially I'll give, again, a second for you guys to answer in your own heads, but they were in disarray. Okay? Now, the blank toddler will not leave his mother's side. So he is relying on her and very shy. So the word that means shy is diffident. The bride and groom are from such blank backgrounds that many wondered how they became a couple. So they're from such different backgrounds, such a huge gap in their backgrounds. So it would be, let's see. Such a disparate backgrounds that many wondered how they became a couple. So there was a huge difference essentially in the backgrounds. Okay, to blank the information about its campus, the college took out newspaper and radio advertisements. So to spread or to scatter it, as you probably have already said out loud and written down, it is disseminate. Very good. Disseminate. And again, this one actually has 2 S's because as we figured out before, if there's an S in the root that comes after it, you keep DIS as its own spelling. So her blank singing kept the carolers from enjoying the evening. So her bad singing, her off-key singing, her discordant singing. The blank between what she expected for her birthday and what she received was enormous. So the difference between it would be disparity. The club members agreed on how to blank their funds. So how to basically to use their funds or how to disperse. Our national deficit is blank to tax revenues received. So in this case, okay, we have to figure out sort of what a deficit is. So it's something that means how much money we need to spend versus how much money we're actually receiving. So it is disproportionate. So it's what we need versus what we actually have. Okay? And then the loan blank was ignored during the budget meeting. So the loan, in this case, the person who was against what everyone else was saying. So the loan dissident. And the leaders of the DARE program hope to try to discourage or try to dissuade youngsters from using illegal drugs. Okay. Then down below, lacking self-confidence, timid, or shy, as you probably have already said, is C, diffident. Something that turns the mind away and relaxes or entertains would be B, diversion. Not able to be consoled. This one's very easy. F, disconsolate. To withhold approval would be D, to dissent. To cut apart would be A, dissect. Out of proportion in size, shape, or amount, be E, disproportionate. Very good. Okay. Here's some more practice. Actually, you know what? Maybe I will have you guys do this for homework as well, so we don't take too much time on it. Let's see. Yeah, I'll go ahead and have you do this for homework. I'll make it optional, so if you get time to do it, you can go ahead and do that. If you don't get time to do it, then that's okay too. I completely understand. We'll go ahead and leave that to your own desire. All right, let's do a little bit of review here. Now, some of this will look very familiar because these words were on your test that you just took. So we're just going to do this out loud so that we can go through it quickly. If you want to write this down, you're welcome to. So prognosticate, the root is nos, and the meaning of nos is know. So prognosticate is to know before. Ambiguity comes from ambi, which means both in this case, or two. And so ambiguity means it could have 2 meanings. You're not sure what it means. An autocrat comes from auto, which means self. And so an autocrat is basically a person who rules by themselves. The synonym of this would be a dictator, like we learned about last week. Biology comes from bio, which means life, plus log, which means study. So it's the study of life, literally. Circumvent comes from circum, which means around. So if you circumvent something, you are going around it, essentially, to get to an easier path. Credible comes from cred, which means belief. And so if something's credible, it's believable. Demographic, demo, if you remember from last week, means people, and then graph means write. So it's something written about people. Generally, it is how a population is divided by race, by religion, by creed, by ages, etc. Disparity comes from dis, which means apart, and disparity literally means the difference between two things. Antagonize comes from anti, which means against, and it means to try to pit someone against each other. Synchronize, sin plus chron. Sin means together, chron means time, so it's happening at the same time. Collusion, if you remember this one, comes from core in this case, and collusion had to do with running. So precursor means pre, which is before, and cur, which means run. So it's running before something else. Jurisdiction had to do, well, dict was the root, and juris means law. So it is to say something that is for the law, or literally, it's where you have the right to have a jury or have some kind of a law. Discordant comes from dis, which means against. So it's basically sound that doesn't fit, doesn't sound right. Millennium, N, which is year, milla, which is 1,000. Anterior is that area in the back, basically. Anti in this case means back or apart. Anthropology, anthropos, is mankind, so it's the study of mankind. Antithesis is something that is anti or opposite. Benign comes from ben, which is good. So it's something that is good. Like a tumor is, if it's benign, that means it's not going to harm you. Bisect, bi means to, and then sect means to cut. So something that's bisected is something that is cut in half. Chronicle, chron again means time, so it's to write down the time of something. Anticipate comes from anti, which means in this case before. So if you're anticipating something, you're looking forward to it. Exceed comes from sed or ses, and it means to go beyond or to go ahead. And then cursory comes from cur, which means run, so it's to run over quickly. So if you give a cursory glance to something, you're not paying attention to it too much, you're just looking at it very quickly. And then an anomaly means something that's strange, something that's out of the ordinary or not normal. All right, very quickly, let's go ahead and go through these. Equa means equal. So if you're looking for a climate that's equally pleasant in summer and winter, you're looking for an equable climate. If you're eager for spring, you're waiting for the spring equinox when days and nights are equal. If you want a fair settlement of a legal case, you want an equitable settlement. And if you can remain equally calm and composed under pleasant or unpleasant circumstances, you are able to maintain your equanimity. So equable is equal at all times, unvarying. So Hawaii has an equable climate, equally pleasant in summer and winter. Then there's equanimity, which is evenness of mind or temper, composure. Now this is one of those SAT words that you guys will probably come across again, so try to put this into your memory. It just means to have be calm under whatever circumstances you come across, essentially. So no matter what happened, she always maintained her equanimity. Equate, to represent, is equal. So it's not possible to equate money and happiness. So as you can imagine, it means pretty much what it looks like. So equate one thing with another means to compare them side by side. Equator, as you know what that is, it's the line that goes around the North and South Poles. I'm sorry, not around the North and South Poles, around the middle of the Earth, and on the two ends of it are the North and South Pole. Then equilateral, like an equilateral triangle, just means having equal sides. Equilibrium, a state of balance. So if you have a strong equilibrium, you can probably lift your foot up and still maintain your balance. If you don't have a good sense of equilibrium, when you lift your foot, you may start to stumble or even fall. So when the horse swerved, the boy lost his equilibrium and fell off. Equinox is the time of year when the sun crosses the equator and day and night are of equal length. So the vernal spring or spring equinox falls on March 21st. So there's usually one per year, at least one per year. Equitable means reasonable, just, or fair. This is another word kind of like equanimity that you want to be familiar with. So if someone is equitable, it means they did the right thing. They did what was fair. Literally, it's like if you remember the scales of justice on one side and then the other. If this was equitable, an equitable situation, they both would have been equal. So the punishment suited the punishment suited the crime. Equity, just as an ownership right to property, because they had paid so little on the mortgage, they had little equity in the house. And then equivalent, equal in value, force, or meaning. The prize was equivalent to a month's wages. Equivocal, having equal voices capable of two interpretations. Her equivocal reply was so carefully worded that the members of each faction thought that she favored them. So this means you have this would be actually very similar to a word that we've already learned, and hopefully you guys are saying it out loud to me right now, but that word is ambiguous. And it actually has a very similar meaning. Equal voice, ambiguous means could be referring to two things equally, essentially. So you're not sure what it means. It is ambiguous. It could be referring to either thing that the person said. Equivocate is to make a statement in which two possible meanings in order to mislead. Again, ambiguous would be the same thing. And then inadequate is an adjective meaning not equal to what is required or insufficient. So my preparation for that exam was inadequate, so I did not score as high as I needed to get the job. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and do this right now so we get this taken care of. All right. So it's not always possible to blank salary and job satisfaction. So to give equal emphasis, or in this case, to equate, to make it equal. Number 2, because he has so often people are reluctant to believe him. So he has so often equivocated. So remember, equivocated means to deliberately try to mislead people by saying something that could have double meanings. So having paid off, I'll give you an example of this. So for example, when you see a commercial that says buy one, get one free, and you're thinking, wow, that's awesome. And then you read the fine print and it says, oh, but in order to do this, you must also buy something at, or 2 other things at full price, or it only applies to things that cost less than $5, and all these types of things. So in that situation, advertisements often equivocate because they're trying to deceive you to get you to buy their product. So having paid off our mortgage, we now have full blank in our house. So we have full ownership or equity. His blank in times of crisis was amazing. So he had a lot of calmness in times of crisis, or in this case, I'm not sure if you guys remember this one, equanimity. Equanimity means just calm or serenity in times of hardship. While trying to ride my bike with several packages, I lost my center of balance or my equilibrium. Florida has a more blank climate than Maine. So it has a more equable. Equable just means very stable climate. Doesn't change too much depending on the time of year. It's just a nice, pleasant climate. Okay. After the fall blank, the days got shorter. That time when the sun kind of, or the day and night are equal, is the equinox. The shape of an island was roughly that of an equal triangle or a equilateral. In giving a blank answer, he tried to please everyone, but actually pleased no one. So he was trying to give an answer that could have many meanings for different people. So he was trying to give an equivocal answer. A blank agreement was finally reached by the contractor and the builder. So essentially it's talking about here a reasonable one, if you remember the scales of justice, equitable. The amount of lumber was blank for the project, so we had to buy more. So we have here, it was not equal to it. It was inadequate. in, add, equate. Equate is the equate part here. According to the grading sheet, 85 is blank to a B. In this case, we're looking for something that basically equals a B. So we're looking for is equitable to a B. The blank intersects South America, Central Africa, and Indonesia. In this case, we're looking for, of course, equator. Okay. All right, let's look down below. Let's quickly just answer these out loud. Just tell me if it is correct or incorrect here. So first of all, we have radio and television make it easy to disseminate information. In this case, that would be correct because it's easy to scatter information there. Her excuse was so credible that no one believed her. No, credible in this case means unbelievable, so it wouldn't be that one. It's usually possible to correlate vocabulary and success in college. That would be correct. We can put those together, essentially. They had a symbiotic relationship, each working better when they worked together. Yeah, so that one would be correct because they're talking about how they rely on each other. The judge's lenient sentence set a precedent for the way that crime was treated in court. That would be correct. So his leniency essentially led to other people treating others lenient as well. A courier is an error in a term paper. That's definitely not true. A courier, if you remember, is a messenger. A bilateral agreement is written in 2 languages. No, that would be a bilingual agreement. The word they're looking for is, hopefully you guys got this one, they're looking for a bilingual agreement. Bilateral in this case means 2 sides or 2 parties, basically. Coherent speech is orderly and easy to follow, correct. An amphibious animal can live in both land and water, correct. As an atheist, he attended church services every morning. Of course, that would not be correct. All right, and then the last page, guys, we have you, which we've actually already learned, but I want to go over this again. So you has to do with good or well. So if you are in a state of euphoria, you feel that life is good, that everything is going well. You always means good or well. Like a eulogy is a speech that says good things about someone. Euphonious prose has a good sound, and the controversial subject of euthanasia is concerned literally with a good death, a death for merciful reasons. Do you ever use euphemisms? A euphemism is when you say something nice in place of something that you really wanted to say, probably. Okay, so eulogize is literally to give a good speech. And it's just a speech in praise of. Now, you can eulogize someone in life, but generally speaking, a eulogy is just someone who has died. You give a eulogy about someone who has died to honor their memory. A euphemism is the substitution of a mild or a good word in place of a distasteful or unpleasant one. She spoke in euphemisms, talking of passing on rather than dying, of the departed rather than the dead, and of the underprivileged rather than the poor. Then we have euphonious, which we just talked about when we talked about cacophonous. So euphonious is having a good sound or harmonious, and euphony, which we talked about before, is a harmonious succession of words having a pleasing sound. Euphoria is a feeling of happiness or well-being after she became engaged. She was in a state of euphoria. Euthanasia, again, literally means good death. Painless putting to death for merciful reasons, as with a terminal illness. So currently this is illegal in most states. However, some states are advocating for this because people who are suffering and they believe that their life is hard enough as is and they would rather end it, they want to have that right to be able to have a doctor in their lives. Okay, then we also have eucalyptus, which is the kind of tree. Eucharist, Eugene, the name actually means good people. That's what the word means. And eugenics means good genetics in a sense. It's the study of genes, essentially. So let's go ahead and go over this. A feeling of well-being is a feeling of euphoria. Okay, having a pleasant sound is euphonious. To give a speech in praise of would be a eulogy. Eulogize, because we're looking for the verb form. Painless putting to death for merciful reasons. in this case would be euthanasia. Substitution of a mild word in place of a distasteful one would be a euphemism. And then finally, spoken or written praise, especially of someone who has recently died, would be a eulogy. Okay, and then I believe there's one more page. And again, kind of like we talked about before, let's just go over this very quickly. In Denmark, euthanasia is legal for the terminally ill. Aaron's piano playing was euphonious to his teacher's ears. Anthony's eulogy after the death of Julius Caesar is one of the best-known passages in Shakespeare's writing. After earning an A+ on her report, Diane was in a state of euphony, would work here. The philanthropist was eulogized for his charitable work. The blank of nursery rhymes is soothing to babies, the sound of it, or the euphony of it. Instead of speaking bluntly, she used euphemisms to convey her meaning. And below, let's just do this real quickly while we're here, while I've got you guys, and then I'll let you go. So to circumvent is to open all the windows. No, it does not have anything to do with venting in a literal way. History is usually taught in chronological order. That is correct. Her explanation, full of circumlocution, never did get to the point. That's correct. If you remember circumlocution, circum means around plus loc, which means to speak. So it is speaking around a topic rather than just speaking it directly. The speaker's long discourse on dieting was boring. That is also correct. A discourse, if you remember, is a long speech. A convivial group gathered for the holiday celebration. Well, hopefully they are convivial. Convivial just means very friendly and polite. My friend and I collaborated to design the poster. Yes, collaborated means work together. The supervisor went around to circumspect each employee's work. No, what word are they looking for? They're looking for inspect. Two different words. A companion was originally a person with whom one shared bread. That is correct. Remember, com means with plus pan, which means bread, so you share your bread with them. The father is an autocrat. The rest of the family bows to his wishes. That would be correct if he was. A credulous person tends to believe without sufficient evidence. That's also correct. It's kind of a gullible person. The tremendous amount of work he did was disproportionate to his small salary. That's also correct. If you do a lot of work but don't get paid very much, that would be disproportionate. A consensus is the recording of a population in an area. No, the word they're looking for is census. The music teacher was pleased with the euphonious playing of her students. Hopefully, she would be. Realizing he was outmatched, the chess player reseeded the game. No, reseed means to go back. He gave up the game or he surrendered, but reseed would not be correct in that context. My reading teacher taught us to predict the ending of the story. Sure, I'm not sure what kind of teacher would teach you to try to predict the story, but there you go. All right, guys, so that's it for today's lesson. Hopefully, if you have not taken the test, you'll go ahead and do that now. But if you did already take it, hopefully it wasn't too hard and you did really well on it. So I'll go ahead and see you when I get back on the 27th, I guess. All right, bye-bye.